The studio lights were warm, almost comforting, casting that familiar daytime glow meant to soften everything it touched. The kind of light that promised laughter, harmless banter, and safe conversation. But beneath it, the air had gone cold in a way no camera could capture. Joy Behar leaned forward in her chair with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times, her posture relaxed, her expression carrying that well-known mix of confidence and mischief. She tossed out the joke casually, as if it were just another throwaway line in a long morning of chatter. It came wrapped in humor, disguised as wit, but there was an edge to it, sharp enough to draw blood if you were listening closely. The audience responded on instinct, laughter rippling through the studio seats like it always did. Applause followed, polite and automatic. But the rhythm broke when the camera cut to Reba McEntire. Her smile didn't widen, it didn't fade either, it simply held, frozen in place, as if her face were waiting for the rest of the room to catch up to what she had already understood. Reba had been gracious all morning, laughing at herself, deflecting little digs with warmth and charm, embodying the southern politeness she was famous for. She had played along, even when the jokes brushed uncomfortably close. But this one lingered. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel on the surface. It was subtle, and that made it worse. Joy kept going, adding a half sentence to seal the punchline, her voice bright, her tone teasing. Yet something in the room shifted. The laughter thinned, trailing off too quickly. A few audience members exchanged glances. Someone in the front row stopped clapping mid-motion. The band didn't jump in. The silence that followed wasn't dramatic, it was awkward, uneven, alive. Reba shifted slightly in her chair, crossing her ankles, smoothing her skirt with deliberate calm. Her eyes stayed on Joy, steady and unreadable, the kind of gaze that didn't challenge but didn't yield either. Joy noticed it a beat too late. She chuckled, expecting the moment to pass, expecting Reba to play along like before. "I'm kidding, of course," she added, waving a hand dismissively, as if intent alone could erase impact. But her laugh echoed oddly, bouncing off a room that had already decided not to follow her there. The panelists glanced at one another, sensing the shift but unsure whether to step in or step back. A producer off-camera lifted a hand, then lowered it again. Reba inhaled slowly, not dramatically, not for effect, just enough to center herself. The camera zoomed in, catching the small movement of her shoulders rising and falling. When she finally spoke, she didn't rush. Her voice was even, calm, almost gentle, but it carried a weight that immediately changed the temperature in the room. She began by acknowledging the joke, repeating part of it back, not mockingly, not angrily, just plainly. In doing so, she stripped it of its humor and laid it bare for what it was. "I know folks laugh at things like that," she said, her tone warm but precise. "And sometimes it's meant to be lighthearted." She paused, letting the words settle. The audience leaned in without realizing it. But when you've spent your whole life being reduced to a caricature, those little jokes don't feel little anymore. The silence deepened. Joy's smile tightened, her eyebrows lifting slightly as if to signal surprise, maybe even mild offense. She shifted in her seat, crossing one leg over the other, preparing to interject. But Reba continued, still calm, still measured. She spoke about growing up having to work twice as hard to be taken seriously, about smiling through comments that were easier to laugh at than confront. She didn't accuse, she didn't point fingers, she simply told the truth, and the truth filled the room. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again. The audience murmured softly, a low sound of recognition. A few people nodded. One woman near the aisle wiped at her eye. The cameras caught everything, the flicker of discomfort on Joy's face, the way the other hosts sat straighter, suddenly aware they were witnesses to something unscripted. Reba finished her thought with a small, controlled smile. "I believe humor's at its best when everyone's in on it," she said. "Otherwise, it's not really funny. It's just loud." The line wasn't sharp, but it landed hard. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger, spreading across the studio until it was impossible to ignore. Joy lifted her hands slightly, as if to calm the crowd, laughing again, but this time the laugh didn't lead, it followed. "Well," Joy said, drawing out the word, trying to reclaim her footing. "I didn't mean it that way." The phrase hung in the air, familiar and insufficient. Reba nodded once, politely, as if acknowledging the effort without accepting the excuse outright. The power dynamic had shifted, quietly but unmistakably. Joy had set the stage, but Reba now controlled the scene. The segment clock ticked on, but time seemed to stretch. The warmth of the studio lights felt harsher now, exposing rather than comforting. Joy shuffled her notes, glancing toward the camera, then back to Reba, searching for a way to move forward without conceding too much. The audience waited, aware they had just witnessed the beginning of something bigger than a joke gone wrong. And Reba, composed and unflinching, sat ready, no longer reacting, but responding, on her own terms. Joy tried to regain control as the applause faded, her hands settling back onto the table with practiced ease. "Well," she said again, this time lighter, faster, as if speed might smooth over the rough edges. "That's the beauty of live TV, right?" A few nervous chuckles surfaced from the audience, but they didn't grow. The moment had already outgrown her. Reba sat back slightly, shoulders relaxed, her expression open but resolute, like someone who had said what needed saying and wasn't interested in reliving it for sport. Joy pressed on, tossing out another quip, softer this time, self-deprecating. "I guess I walked right into that one," she joked, lifting her eyebrows toward Reba in a silent invitation to laugh it off together. For a second, it seemed like Reba might accept the olive branch. She smiled, but it was a different smile now, one that held understanding without surrender. She nodded, acknowledging the attempt, then spoke again, calmly reclaiming the floor without raising her voice or changing her posture. "It's not about walking into anything," Reba said. "It's about what we choose to do once we're standing there." The words were simple, but the room felt them. The other panelists leaned in, suddenly alert, their earlier ease replaced by careful attention. Reba continued, speaking about conversations she'd had behind closed doors, about moments when laughter was used as a shield instead of a bridge. She wasn't lecturing, she was inviting reflection, and that made it harder to dismiss. Joy's expression flickered, defensiveness giving way to something closer to uncertainty. She adjusted her glasses, nodding along, but her eyes darted briefly toward the producers, as if checking how much time was left. The red light on the camera stayed on. There was no escape hatch. Reba's words weren't accusatory, but they were clarifying, and clarity can be uncomfortable when you've built a career on quick wit and faster comebacks. One of the co-hosts attempted to step in, offering a neutral comment about the importance of humor and perspective. Reba acknowledged her with a warm glance, agreeing gently, then added, "Perspective is exactly what I'm talking about." The audience responded with soft applause, not thunderous but sincere. Joy laughed again, a short burst this time, more reflex than confidence. "Well, I suppose I'll be more careful next time," she said, half smiling. Reba didn't pounce on the opening. She didn't need to. "Careful's good," she replied. "But thoughtful lasts longer." That was when the room truly went still. The sentence settled like a final note in a song, resonating beyond the moment it was spoken. Joy's smile froze, then softened. For the first time, she didn't immediately respond. The cameras caught the pause. In live television, silence is a risk. But this silence felt earned. The audience held it respectfully, as if instinctively understanding that filling it would diminish what had just happened. Joy cleared her throat. "Fair enough," she said quietly. It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't deflection either. It was acknowledgement, and that, in its own way, was a concession. The show moved on, as it always does. A new topic, a commercial tease, the machinery of daytime television grinding forward. But the energy never fully reset. Joy participated, offering comments, laughing when appropriate, yet there was a subtle restraint now, a recalibration. Reba answered questions with her usual warmth, but there was a firmness beneath it, a line clearly drawn and carefully maintained. The audience noticed. They always do. When the final segment wrapped, the host thanked Reba for joining them. Reba stood, smoothing her jacket, and turned toward the audience. The applause this time rose immediately, fuller and louder, unprompted and sustained. It wasn't just for her career or her music. It was for the way she had handled herself in a moment that could have gone very differently. Joy stood as well, clapping along, her smile polite, her nod measured. The cameras cut away, but the feeling lingered. Backstage, the noise softened into a hum of movement and murmured conversation. Crew members exchanged looks, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others smiling faintly. Reba thanked everyone she passed, her demeanor unchanged, kind, gracious, unassuming. Joy remained near the table for a moment longer than usual, gathering her notes slowly. A producer approached, speaking in a low voice. Joy nodded, lips pressed together, then looked up as Reba walked by. "Hey," Joy said, stopping her gently. Reba turned, attentive. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then Joy sighed, the performative edge gone. I hear what you said, she admitted. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to hear, but it was real. Reba smiled softly. That's all I hoped for, she replied. They parted without ceremony. No grand reconciliation. No dramatic fallout. Just two women walking away from a moment that would be replayed, debated, clipped, and shared. By the afternoon, social media was already buzzing, some calling it a takedown, others praising the grace of it, a few insisting it was all blown out of proportion. Clips circulated with bold captions and flashing words, but none of them fully captured what had actually happened in that room. Because the truth was quieter. Reba hadn't humiliated Joy with cruelty or volume. She'd done something far more unsettling. She'd held up a mirror, calmly and publicly, and invited everyone, including Joy, to look. And once that mirror was raised, there was no joke clever enough to shatter it.